Okay, welcome to Flow Academy and our class on negotiating. And of course, my little screen. There we go. Hey, there it is. Look at that fancy negotiating screen. How clever is that too, communication? Because that really is what it's all about. Okay, so the purpose of this class is for you to be able to negotiate your best deal. And we're going to kind of focus on three specific areas. One is negotiating with other agents. One is negotiating the best list price for your client, because we frequently are having to kind of coach our clients and what makes sense. And often there's a discrepancy there as to what they think the house is worth versus maybe what you know it should be listed at. And then the last thing will be negotiating your best commission. Now, the interesting thing is that all three of these conversations are tied together with the ultimate conversation, which is you getting your best commission. So I should say the first two are tied with the third one. All right, before we get into that, I want to just talk a little bit about how it is, at least that Kevin and I present to clients and why this is so important. So you've heard this before. That guy can sell ice to an Eskimo. Yesterday, I was in Facebook. One of my friends said, which now I'm feeling like it's probably inappropriate, but he said something like, he could sell sand to Arabs. It's probably inappropriate. But anyway, it's the same idea. And the point is that these are not salespeople. These are con men, right? We're not manipulators. What we're trying to do is really be the best we can. We're trying to provide an actual genuine service for people. So for me, a true salesperson finds and fills a genuine need, not a made up one, not one that's self-serving. A true salesperson is willing to lose the deal for the right reasons. And a true salesperson is a role of honor. In other words, I had, for me anyway, having been in sales for 30 years, I had to fight off this idea that I was like a salesman, like that was some kind of bad thing, because we are portrayed that way in a lot of areas. And of course, there are plenty of people in our profession that give us a bad name. But on the other, what I found in my career in real estate is like this is legit, where you really get to make a difference for people. And it's super important that every time you're walking into a deal, whether you're dealing with another agent or a client or anybody, that you're just being authentic, right? That you're just coming from, what is the best deal for the people that I'm working with, and looking for what's, just only thinking about them, which of course is just a fiduciary responsibility anyway. Okay, so let's first talk about getting the best deal for your clients or negotiating with other agents. And the reason this is so important is that this is really what is going to separate you from the other agents. And we're going to talk about this later in the commission part. But what we're combating here, and what I want you to be thinking about, is that a lot of times without any other information, when clients are looking at us, they're looking at what we do as basically a commodity. And what happens is if you're looking at something as just a commodity, meaning it's basically, I'm buying sugar. I could buy sugar for £1 for $1 a pound, or I could buy it for 80 cents a pound. Well, I might as well just buy the 80 cents a pound because they're both sugar. And what we don't want is for people to be thinking about us that way. And so the very first thing the picture that we're going to be painting for our clients when we're talking to them, is how we're going to negotiate a better deal for them. And that's really the biggest thing that separates us. So that's why we're going to talk about negotiating with other agents. It actually starts with helping the clients understand this idea of highest net price. This also goes back to the commission that we're going to talk about at the end. They get too focused on a 0.5% in commission, or not spending money on staging or whatever it is, thinking that all the things that we're suggesting, including paying us more money, is going to get them the highest net dollar. So for example, when we go in and we talk about, getting a house ready and making some repairs or doing some painting or doing some flooring, one of the things that we always say is everything I'm going to suggest is going to do one of two things. It's either I expect it to return 3 or 4 times its value or more. So if I tell you to spend, $10,000 on floors, I'm expecting that to be $30,000 to $40,000 on the sale side of when we actually close the deal. or it's going to repair what would be otherwise a deal breaker. And you're probably not going to get your 2, 3, 4 time return out of a deal breaker, but a roof or a foundation, things that where buyers are really just going to balk and not move in. Those are things that we just have to have those hard conversations. But it's helping the clients understand the why behind what we're suggesting, because what we're combating is, it's funny, and I'm sure you've dealt with this. Clients think we're just trying to make it easier on ourselves, right? They just want it to sell faster because it's easier for them. No, this is all about getting them the highest net dollars. The other thing that's great, and we want to talk to them about, is sometimes you'll be thinking you're going to do something with your house that doesn't make sense. And we're going to tell you that as well. In other words, sure, you could replace, some flooring in a particular area of your house, but we may look at it and go, look, it's good enough the way it is that you're really not going to get your bang for your buck. And helping them understand that that is our role, is to help them get that highest net price, right? Same thing is going to go for staging. I know for me, for many years at the beginning of my real estate career, I didn't have the courage to really tell people you have to stage. And really that's on me. I actually feel bad for the people that were kind of earlier in my career and me not understanding the value of staging. I can't remember the last time I had a vacant home that wasn't staged. I'm so convinced of the value of staging, but you need to be convinced of that same thing. All of these things, you need to be convinced of this ultimate payoff, which is for them and the value of their final sale price. And the other thing is pre-inspections. Now, most of us do pre-inspections now, but for the longest time, agents had a hard time telling their clients, hey, you're going to need to spend some money on pre-inspections. Nicole and I were just doing a deal where the client really pushed back on this. Well, the last time I bought a house, I had to do the inspections. Why do I have to do them now? Why do I have to spend the money and all that stuff? And you need to be prepared to answer those questions so that they understand the benefit to them, right? And if it's not obvious, I'll say that the benefit to them, the kind of high watermark thing is that, if we're going into contract, first of all, in this market especially, we want to give the buyer every opportunity to write an offer that doesn't have an inspection contingency. Well, if you haven't done inspections, that's not going to happen. But the other reason, even outside of this market, is that as soon as we go from putting our house out there and marketing it and having hopefully multiple, at least 2 people saying, pick me, when we're in a position of strength there, that's the time when we can get everybody to acknowledge the condition of the home. As soon as we accept one buyer, the power struggle goes to them. And if we've not done the report so that we've disclosed everything to them, we've left ourselves vulnerable to finding something that might need to be negotiated during the, during the escrow. And that's exactly what we don't want. And by the way, all of these conversations are still leading to them getting the highest net price. Therefore, you are the right person to hire, even if it's going to cost them a little bit more money based on some of the agents you might be competing with. Then we want to also make sure that that we understand. Did somebody have a question, or is that just a non-muted person? Okay, I'm going to keep going. Sorry about that. Or am I just hearing things? Is it ghost in my house? Okay, the other thing that is so important when we're getting highest, when we're negotiating with the other agents, is again putting our house in the best light. So do not, and most people now, professional photography. I remember I was for a while only using professional photography on the nicer homes, and then I realized that's ridiculous. Why am I not putting every single house in its best light? We use a professional writer to write the descriptions of our house. So we give the outline, the important things, but we use somebody who works for, is it Realtor? Where does she work? Do you remember, Nicole? Anyway, she's a professional writer, and she writes, this is what she does for a living. Goes back to who, not how, like we're talking about this week. And then of course, leveraging our professional pre-marketing network. So in our area, it's Top Agent Network and some other ones. Coming soon through the MLS, if your MLS offers that, and so forth. And all of this is because we're trying to build up this buyer pool that we get at least 2 people that want the house, right? And so we like to talk about tension points. not tension like this is a struggle or this is hard, but tension in that there is this like, oh, if I'm the buyer, I have to take action. You know what I mean? I have to do something here. And we have really adopted kind of two tension points, at least in this market. One is pre-market, and then the other is post MLS. And then there is a third tension point that happens during an escrow that we'll talk about a little bit as well, which is trying to maintain that tension. But the tension that we're talking about is creating this demand that would hopefully make somebody pay more than what the comps would suggest it's worth. So we're going to talk about that a little bit in that price range in the getting your best list price in a minute. But that is what we're shooting for. There is a range that your listing is worth, right? And what we're shooting for is to exceed that range higher than anybody would think about actually listing the home for by creating that tension. And we can do it two areas. One is pre-market, where if somebody comes along, we've got one right now that it's just kind of off the side, and we're telling a few agents about it, and people are getting in, of course, before it's actually ready and on the market and so forth. And because the market is the way it is, they're saying, would your seller consider a preemptive offer? Listen, we would love to consider a preemptive offer. However, we feel like we've priced it correctly, and we're likely to get multiple offers. So if your buyer would like to not have that go to the market, you would have to make the offer, good enough to figure that into the equation. That's a tension point. That's where somebody will give you more than what the comps suggest, right? And then, of course, the other tension point is the one that we are often faced with, which is an offer date. So for us, we do an 8-day marketing period. We put houses on the market on a Monday. We have a whole week of marketing, brokers tour, open houses over the week. Monday is to kind of collect your thoughts, and then we look at offers on Tuesday at I forget if it's 11 or 2 o'clock, but we look at offers on Tuesdays. And the idea again is that we've got at least two people that are competing for that house. The difference between 1 and 2 people is gigantic. You all probably are aware of that. I don't need to go into it, but it really, really, it can be hundreds of thousands of dollars when you have 2 versus 1. The other thing is during the actual escrow, if there is something left undone and something needs to happen, maintaining some kind of tension within that conversation. So the way you're doing that is it's like a big poker game. And this goes from the very beginning of when they start talking to you about what is your seller looking for, all the way through the escrow. Is you're trying to keep as many of your cards to yourself as possible, and you want to know as many of their cards as you can figure out. The number one thing that you're trying to figure out is their buyer's overall desire, right? I'll give you an example. We get into an escrow. The house is, it's fine, but there's some inspections that they did that were beyond what we did. And something comes up through that where they feel like they're going to request some kind of request for repair or credit. So what I do is I listen intently to what they're telling me. I acknowledge receipt of that information. So in other words, I repeat back. So it sounds like they're concerned about the heater being beyond its useful life. And as a result of that, you're not asking for the whole $10,000, but you'd like a $5,000 credit to compensate for the heater that that might break at some point. And they go, that's right. I go, okay, yeah, that makes sense. I can see where you're coming from. Let me put this in front of the sellers and see what they have to say. By the way, is this a deal breaker, you think, for your clients or not? Now, I'm going to be very casual about that conversation. I've had a relationship with this person throughout the whole transaction. And that, by the way, that's why it's important to kind of maintain your cool and be cool throughout the whole transaction. So there is this kind of friendly banter. And at that point, it's often that the other agent, maybe not realizing what they're saying, might say something like, oh, no, it's not a deal breaker. Okay. So now what have I done for the client? I have put them in a position where they can make a more informed decision as to whether they want to give that credit to the buyer or not, right? So I can go back to them and say, hey, this is what they're looking at. This is what they want to do. And let them, have their conversation about it. Often clients will go, that makes sense. I'd like to do that for them. But I will also let them know, hey, I really don't think this is a deal breaker for the buyer, so that they don't feel like they have to do something. So that's a tension point throughout during the escrow, just as an example. Now, I always want to have one of these stories, or two or maybe three stories like this, where I'm giving them example of saving them or giving them thousands of dollars. And I have a whole bunch on the negotiating side that I can share as well. But the point is that, when I'm talking with my actual clients, is that they're hearing from me the value that they have by hiring me in the thousands and thousands of dollars versus just some small amount, because we're going to get to that in the commission in a second. Okay, so let's talk about getting your best list price. Now, we know that getting the right list price has everything to do with how you're going to be able to sell this house. If you do not have the ability to convince your seller to price it accurately, you are facing not only a problem for yourself and how long you're going to have that listing and it's not selling, but it's not a service to them, right? The easy thing to do is to just tell them what they want to hear, right? We all know that. But you're getting paid partially to tell them what they don't want to hear and help them understand the reality of their circumstances and giving them the correct list price. Now, part of that obviously is bringing your supporting data. That's what we all do. You have a CMA and you go, hey, here's the thing, and so forth. But a lot of it is going to go even further than that, like helping them understand how the market works. Like, for example, there is no exact right list price, right? There's a range. There's a range based on what the comps support and what we feel like the supply and demand is and all that. And you want to give them a range, and anything exceeding that higher end range that you think makes sense is really shooting themselves in the foot, and ultimately can lead to them not only getting a lower price than their highest price, but it could even go lower than the lowest range suggests, right? So it's really important that you're able to have that conversation with people. By the way, one thing I do like to do is I just like to find out what number are they hoping for. Sometimes they'll just tell you, and I'm not going to use their number to determine what I'm going to suggest. I already have the data. I'm going to show up with the same amount of data. What it does do for me is it helps me helps me understand how I'm going to have that conversation with them about price. If they're coming over, if they come in with some number that I know is, 2 or 3 or 5 or 10% too high, then I know how to start, positioning myself. On the other hand, if they're right in the range that I'm at, all I'm doing is supporting the information that they already think. And the best scenario for me, for any of us, is when they have a number that's actually too low. It doesn't happen too often, but today it actually does. It can actually happen, I would say about half the time, where they don't even realize their house is worth more than what they're thinking. And so that's the greatest thing, is to go, hey, guy, got great news. It's actually going to go for higher than that. Keep an open mind about pricing. I think a lot of times I see agents come in with a specific number that it needs to be this. It's maybe even written on their CMA before they've even seen the house. It's a range. And so give yourself that leeway, especially if you've never been to the house before. Even though you may be super experienced with the neighborhood, there may be things about it that you go, oh, geez, I didn't even know that. And pigeonholing yourself into a specific number is usually not a good idea. Having some kind of data or a slide that shows the advantage of correctly pricing, I'm sure you've all seen these charts, it's so important to get that in front of them so that they get the correlation, because so many people think that we're just trying to price it low so we can sell it fast so we can get out. Like that's their first thought. Okay, so we talked about, there is no exact price. We're going to give them a range to help them figure out the right, the right ultimate list price. We want to help them understand there's kind of two things going on here. One is where we list the price, where we list the house, and, but then where it's actually going to sell and who picks what. They get to choose where the list price is. You ultimately get to choose, do you even want to work with them if their list price is not fair? And I think it's okay to say that to people, like, hey, if we don't agree on a price, there is a point at which it doesn't really make sense for me to participate in it, because I'm not going to do that, and people, they think that you'll just take any listing. And so having some integrity with yourself about a range and where you won't take a listing, I think is really important. But then helping them understand who makes the final sales price, right? It's not going to be you or I, and it's not going to be them, right? It's going to be the buyer ultimately. And so putting the buyer in the best position, creating that tension for them, thinking, oh my gosh, I'm not going to get it. This is the house I want. What do I have to do to get this house? And having those tension points where they're willing to pay more than what makes sense. And of course, there's tons of that going on right now. But even when it's not as crazy as this, that still can be the case, no matter what the market is. And then, of course, helping them understand the risk of pricing it too high. And that there's almost no risk of pricing it too low. There's probably some version of that. But for those of you, do we have any students in the city? I don't know. I think we do. In the city, I think they just price everything too low, if I'm not mistaken. And they just kind of create an auction, it seems like, but maybe I'm wrong about that. All right, so we've got the pricing right. We've had the conversation with them. We've showed them how we're going to position ourselves with the agents and our negotiating tactics. And it is really important that you understand your value there. And literally, it could be hundreds of thousands of dollars difference because of who you are and what you bring to the table. And I'm not going to, I won't on this class go through the hundreds of $1,000 stories, but I have multiple $100,000 stories where people are getting the difference that it's amazing. I mean, they're very pleased with having that. And so we're trying to help them see that value versus getting all wrapped up in 0.5%. It's comical that they do this, but this is where they go. So we want you to be excited. So many agents are like, oh, I gotta have that conversation about commission. I just don't want to do it. And a lot of that has to do with your own feeling of worth, and you have to, I remember this is again, earlier in my career, and I was doing a lot more buying and a lot less selling listing. And the manager I had at the time was like, dude, you have to believe that you are the best one for the job. And I remember thinking, I don't actually believe I'm the best one for the job. So I really needed to hone my own skills and become that person so that I could feel that way. So if you're feeling like I'm not that best person yet, then we want to help you get there, and you can be that best person. But that is important because you are going to be asking for top dollar for what you do. You have to believe that you are the best. Okay. The timing of this conversation really needs to be at the end of a listing appointment. The reason I'm saying this is I don't have this happen too much anymore, but it seems like earlier in my career, especially, I would get this conversation before I would even be at their house. They're like, hey, we're thinking about selling our house. What do you charge for commission? Right. So you need to have a way to defer that conversation, but at the same time, answer it. So I say something like, that's a great question. And when we get together, I'm gonna show you what your options are if you decide to list your home with me. And so you're giving them the idea that there's options, because there will be, and you're not giving them a specific answer. And usually that is sufficient. And let's see. Okay, sorry about that. All right. So you want to know the math in your head when you go into the listing so that you are, sorry, I skipped a slide. How many of you do the math in your head, $30,000 on a $1 million listing, and you think to yourself, I'm not even worth that $30,000. And you're basing that maybe on your experience, or maybe you're basing it on the fact that sometimes things sell so quickly that if you did your price per hour, your hourly rate just on one particular listing, you might be making, $1,000, $2,000 an hour for your actual amount of effort that you put in. And so I want you to change your mindset around that your real value is much bigger than that. It goes back to the net price that they're going to get for the client, that you're going to get for the client. So whether you work 5 minutes on a listing or 100 hours on a listing, it's not about how many hours you work at all. It's not even about your effort. What it is about is you getting the highest net price for your client. That is your real value. independent of how hard you work or how much experience you have or how long it takes to sell a house, one way or the other. So I just want you to have that mind shift in your head. Like, that's what this is about. You getting the highest net price for your client. Now, this is another really important point that I think is not discussed. When we're in front of a listing, and especially if we're competing, the seller is charged with this idea of hiring somebody to sell their house. However, they have no idea what they're looking for. They don't know good from bad, right? You may have been referred to them. They may have seen reviews for you or whatever. But at the end of the day, they have almost no experience making this gigantic decision on what is their, probably for most people, their biggest financial transaction. And if we don't do our job right, they're going to funnel it down to that commodity level. Well, this person's 3%, that other person's 2.5%. This person's 6%, the other person's 5%, whatever that is. And so it's really important. I even say this to people. Listen, you've been charged with this job of trying to find the right realtor. And you're going to see fancy presentations and all these other things. But at the end of the day, there's different things that you should be thinking about. You should be thinking about the personal relationship that you might have with that person. You're kind of getting into a mini relationship with this person, and how do they interact? And are you comfortable with them? I tell them point blank, if I leave this house and you're thinking to yourself, that guy, I don't really care for him, you should not hire me. You should not hire me if I don't give you that kind of that feel good, if you don't have confidence in me. And also this goes back to that highest net price thing. You have to have during your listing presentation, give them these stories about all these things that you're going to do to get them the highest net price. And so that value, having that conversation with them, helping them understand that the decision they make is going to end up with thousands of dollars extra in their pocket, finding that right person, taking away the idea that it's a commodity, because it's not just about the people that you like. And it certainly isn't about the person that just gives you the highest list price. It's super important to have this conversation about that. They basically, to tell them, hey, listen, this is a tough job, but you don't have any experience here. Let me help you with that. So what criteria do they need to use to make their final decision on who their realtor is? And this goes back to the commission question, right? If we haven't done it right, they get into this penny wise, pound foolish, and they start thinking about the 2.5 versus 3%, right? That's usually the difference. I don't come across too many agents that are trying to compete at 2%, for example. Almost everybody will do 2.5, and I never do 2.5. I just don't. 3% is my number, and I want to help them understand. So I've built this whole thing up about where I'm saving them tens of thousands of dollars. There's going to be opportunities somewhere in the escrow where I'm going to continually make money, and I'm almost obsessed with making sure I get you that highest net dollar. So by the time we get down to this part where we're talking about the difference between 2.5 and 3% on $1 million and it's $5,000, they're like, well, I don't even know why that matters. You're right, it doesn't matter. So by the time, if you've done it right, they're having this conversation. You're saying, hey, it's $5,000 difference. Is that what you're willing to sacrifice for what I bring to the table? And the answer, if I've done my job right, is it's not. The other thing is that when it finally comes down to the actual number, and I actually should have done these slides a little bit backwards, the commission you pay to the seller, the commission you pay as a seller pays me and the agent for bringing in the buyer. I charge 3% for my side of that, but you have the choice of paying the buyer's agent 2.5 or 3%. So this is basically the line that I say to every single listing appointment. It's very straightforward. You may have already heard this before. Maybe some of you already use this, but basically you're saying, look, I charge this for all the amazing things that you just heard from me. And we have this option because the buyer's agent is also going to be paid for by you. Would you like to give them 2.5 or 3%? And what happens is the entire conversation becomes about the buyer's agent. Like 95% of the time, that's all we discuss. And then, of course, I'm in this position where I said, well, here's the advantage of giving them 2.5. here's the percent, the advantage of maybe giving them 3%. But ultimately you get to decide. And they ask me a few questions. And sometimes they go, I don't want this to be, I don't want anybody to think I'm cheap. Give them 3%. I go, great. How many people do the 2.5? Well, it's quite frequent. Great. I'd like to save 0.5%. Awesome. It doesn't matter, right? For me at that point. So that is how we get 3%. I said 95% of the time. I don't know what it actually is, but it exceeds 95%, I would guess. All right. So what will the roadblocks be? For me, I'm guessing that depending on your experience, the number one roadblock is going to be your comfort level around, do I really bring this to the table? Am I really a great negotiator? And the way you become a great negotiator is exposing yourselves to other great negotiators, finding, doing your own research, taking negotiating classes. Carol yesterday was talking about Never Split the Difference. That's a great negotiating book. But this is so important to your craft. Spend the time to seek out great negotiating skills, and you will become a great negotiator. Show up to a live coach on Thursdays, and we can role play great negotiating tactics as well. And so that's probably going to be the number one thing is I'm not there yet. How do I get it? The next thing is just rolling these things into your everyday vernacular. When you're talking to clients, it should always be this kind of, I have these stories I tell, they paint this picture that I add a lot of value and therefore I get more money. It should never be, because here's the thing. You get these crazy things from sellers who are like, well, I need every dollar I can, so I have to pay only 2.5%. I need every dollar I can, so I have to list it for a higher price. These are things that make sense to them. And so it's our job to be able to have those difficult conversations. And so it's a matter of practice. So maybe scripting is another way to, just practice with people on having these objectives that we hear from sellers and being able to turn that around, because of course they need the highest. I don't care whether they need the money or not. I want to get them the highest net dollars, right? But we need to have them get those conversations turned around. So I think those are the two main roadblocks, and I think that wraps it up.